Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Have a Life Teaching podcast, where we hope if you're a teacher, you're getting some great tips for your teaching. And let's say you're an administrator, hopefully you're getting some ideas on what your school culture and climate should be like and what you should be seeing in classrooms as you do your instructional rounds. So as you know, listeners, every week we talk about a different topic that is an important one within the world of K-12 education. And this week is no different. So recently I had the opportunity to be looking on LinkedIn and seeing what some of my current colleagues are doing and some of my former colleagues. And I was really excited because I did my doctorate at Seton Hall University in a cohort program where 40 of us or so were in a cohort together, and we really bonded. It was a 2-year program. So I was really stoked to see my colleague, Dr. Maribeth Edmunds, who goes by Dr. MB Edmunds these days, giving a TED Talk about what we should be thinking about and what we should be doing to prepare children with autism for the world that they're going to enter as adults. Like, what can we be doing to better support adults with autism? And I found her talk, which we will definitely link to in the show notes, to be profound. It was short, it was sweet, but it was profound. And it reminded me of all the wonderful things Dr. Edmunds would say in our cohort program. And I was like, I got to get her on the show. So Dr. Edmunds, thank you for being here. I really am excited about speaking to you about how we help students with autism.
Well, Dr. John Shembari, I'm just so happy to reconnect with you too, and delighted that we crossed paths again, because as you say, when we did our doctoral program, the whole cohort came together as a big family. And many of us, actually in that cohort, there were people coming from all over the world. We had people coming in from Costa Rica and Singapore and Wyoming, I think.
You're right.
So they were coming in from all over the world. So the fact that we lost contact, but we did reconnect, was a happenstance that I was happy to see you. So again, it was a pleasure reconnecting with you, and I'm delighted to be here to talk with you about my mission and my work promoting acceptance and embracing our children who have autism. So I'm delighted to be here.
And like I said, I'm always excited to have former friends, current friends, future friends join me on the podcast. So Dr. Edmunds, your mission is, helping educators to create learning environments that are inclusive for, in this case, which we're going to talk about, children with autism. So before we get into discussing that, why this topic? I mean, of all the topics, I mean, you're a principal of note, you've been a school leader, a district leader. Now that you've transitioned from in the school environment to being a consultant and running your own business, why are you focusing your attention on this issue?
To be perfectly frank and honest, I have a son with autism. He is now 40 years old. And so I would venture to say that a big chunk of my life has been involved with autism on a day-to-day basis. And of course, when he was born and he was a toddler, we didn't have a diagnosis. And at that point, we didn't even know what autism was. I mean, we're going back before Rain Man was
Right.
in the movies and before autism was in our popular culture. So we didn't really know what we were dealing with back then. And as a matter of fact, John, when he was diagnosed, the statistics were that it was 4 or 5 in 10,000 births.
Wow.
So it was, when it was identified and described to us, they told us it was a low incidence disability. And we didn't even know what that meant. It just meant that not a lot of people were dealing with it. So, as the years have gone by, and as we've worked to help my son learn and grow and become a young man and live his life, I realized I have a lot of knowledge and experience to share because families and schools and communities will be seeing more and more children and adults with autism, because the mere fact is that every child that you meet with autism is going to grow up to be an adult with autism. And so that's how it is. So are we ready? And so my mission is to communicate and to build knowledge around this topic so that we build understanding.
I don't think I know there are very few people that are as positioned as you to do it, because not only are you a parent that has the understanding and the empathy of
Mm-hmm.
helping our young people who have autism, but you are a trained educational leader as well. So you've seen this issue from both sides. You've seen it in terms of how you manage it and work with it in a school system, but also how we need to vest our parents in the journey when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
helping our students with autism succeed. And you said something else there, Dr. Edmunds, that I thought was very interesting. You said that when your son was diagnosed, it was a low incidence disability. Is that the right term?
That's how yes, sometimes it's either disability or disorder. That's basically how it's described. It's not a disease. Autistic people are not sick, but they have a lifelong disability or a neurological disorder. That's how it's typically described.
Are we also using more the term neurodivergent now as well?
Neurodiverse is a term that's gaining in popularity, but if parents bring a child to be diagnosed by a clinician or a medical doctor, it's not going to. That's neurodiverse is not a diagnosis.
Got it.
It's describing how we think about how the brain works. So autism, attention deficit disorder, those are neurological disorders that a clinician would diagnose, and it's in the DSM. Neurodivergent is a different it's a different term.
Understood. So I wanted to bring that up, though, at least in terms of when your son was diagnosed, on how quote unquote rare it was. But in your TED Talk, one thing that I found fascinating was originally the CDC was saying now, or at least in modern, current times, 1 in 36. I don't know how long that was the statistics for students or children with autism, but you said in your TED Talk that recently the CDC has, no, I'm sorry, that it was 1 in 44 for a certain period of time of students being or children being diagnosed at age 8 with autism. But now it's 1 in 36.
Correct. So since 2000, the CDC has been recording the rates of this diagnosis in 8-year-olds. And so they have different sites, representative sites. I think there's 11 sites around the country, and they monitor the number of diagnoses in not just autism, but probably in other areas. But they've been working to gather these statistics for the ASD, the autism spectrum disorder. And so it was originally 1 in 56, and then it went to 1 in 100, and then we were at 1 in 44 for a long time. And then just over the last 8 months, I would say, it moved to 1 in 36. So this trajectory is puzzling and something I think that we should all pay attention to, because if you're a principal of a school, let's say, and you have 100 kids, there's a likelihood that 3 of them will be on the spectrum. And so as you start to calculate, right, how many children you have in a building, whether it's 100 or 500 or 1,000, you'll meet more and more children who are diagnosed. And then there are those who have autism spectrum disorder symptoms who may not be diagnosed yet, who are going undetected. So I think what principals, schools, and communities need to know is that more and more children will be in their midst and in their communities who have ASD diagnoses.
And that is important to know, because as we aim in the 21st century to create learning environments that are inclusive, inclusivity is not just cultural inclusivity. Of course, it is also our students with ASD on the spectrum, as well as with other conditions as well. So, you answered my next question, Dr. Edmunds, which was the why. Why should we care? But you also preloaded the next question I was actually going to ask you, which is whether or not somebody has been officially diagnosed with autism or not. What are the typical signs or symptoms of a child who may have autism?
Okay, well, there's characteristics that the autistic population share, and then there's the spectrum, right? You could have these, communication is certainly the first one. So the first characteristic is the difficulty with language. Some children don't gain language until they're 4, 5, 6, or some never develop language. So you'll have some that don't have language, and then you have others that use language, but it's just not quite what we consider conventional. So, for example, my son has language, and he would come up to you, Dr. Shambari, and he'd say, Dr. Shambari, it's nice to meet you. He'd say, what brings you here? And if you didn't know, you wouldn't think there's anything different about my son. And then before long, he would start talking to you about trains and New Jersey Transit. And then he would start to perseverate on a topic of his interest. So a second piece with autism is that very often there's very specific interests that they perseverate on or obsess on. And so you have communication, you have this very significant interest. Very often repetitive behaviors are a characteristic that many autistic people have. It might be the way the children line up toys, or certain, they don't play with a child, they might play separately. So teachers might notice a child's always going to a certain puzzle or a certain set of blocks, and the blocks get stacked the very same way. You eat your M&Ms, you eat all the brown ones first, then you eat all the color ones next, that kind of thing. And then another characteristic is sensitivity, sensory sensitivity. So sometimes children with autism, even adults with autism, can't take loud noises, or if there's too many people in the room or too much stimuli, that could result in some kind of a meltdown. And we're still not sure why there's differences in the sensory conditions, but again, it's a neurological disorder. So those are the things, the sensory repetitive behaviors and language. Those are typically the things that we see with autism. Now, you could have a whole range. Some people could have very minimal signs. Some people could be very severe. So you could have children with what we're now calling profound autism. They don't have any speech. They can't manage themselves. They can't feed themselves. Some children are very, very disabled, but there's others that can manage quite well.
Given the statistics that we're talking about, there's a good probability, as you were saying, in terms of looking at it from the leadership lens, in terms of principals understanding that they're going to probably have an increasing number of students with autism. But so are an increasing number of gen ed teachers. Because if the student hasn't been diagnosed or they are high functioning, we should be creating environments that are inclusive and that vest these students in our communities just like our other students. You were mentioning what we could look out for in terms of the signs or the symptoms. Let's now take that question to the next level. So let's say, Dr. Edmunds, I am a gen ed teacher. Maybe, I have a co-teacher, a special educator in with me. Maybe I'm in an ICT class, or maybe I'm just, it's just me. But I have a student that is high functioning with autism. What are some of the things that I might want to do? Some of the hacks, if you will, to make their learning journeys easier and make them more comfortable, students with autism in my classroom?
I'm so glad you asked that question because there's a lot we can think about. The first thing, of course, is to talk with parents and to get a sense from parents what is comforting to the child. And parents usually, by the time kids are coming into school, have a pretty good idea of what kinds of sensory needs the child has and whether or not the child can sit with kids or talk with other kids. So having a good understanding from the parents about that learner, like we do with all children, right? We have to get to know our learners. And that's just fundamental here as well. The second piece is to make the child comfortable and not to put high stress demands on the child at first. So we need what I could say is like these little incremental steps before you say to a child, all right, go to the board and solve the quadratic formula. You don't start with a high demand. You're going to start with the small demand. The other piece that I find, and I have found very helpful, is to have the child visit the school, meet the teacher, sit in the seat, get a look at, touch the books, touch things, get a sense of what the classroom is ahead of when the other kids get there. So that there's this some familiarity before school begins and the other kids get there. And the last thing that I would suggest, which we've done with my son, and we did it a long time ago, and he still does it. We created a social story, and every time, Carl Ross, my son's name is Carl Ross. So Carl Ross goes to school. We would take a picture of him by the school door. We'd take a picture of him on the bus. We'd take a picture of him with his teacher, a picture of him with his in his seat doing his work, and then put the social story together and prepare the child the way you would read, Good Night Moon, right? So you would read this and look at this and prepare the child. So the child, oh yes, this is the seat I'm going to sit in, and this is, the pencil I'm going to use. Now, the thing with ABA, so sometimes you need those rewards, and that's where your learning consultant is going to come in and your RBT. So if you have applied behavioral analysis as part of the IEP, then it's another component that the teachers need to be aware of and know how that's going to work. The last thing I want to say at this moment, if there's going to be a change in a routine, if the pencil breaks, if there's going to be a fire drill, if there's no pizza on Friday and there's always pizza on Friday, you have to prepare this child well in advance, because if it's Friday and there's always been pizza and one Friday there's no pizza and this child doesn't know, there could be a meltdown. And those are the kinds of things that young children with autism can have real challenges with, and that could create some difficulty.
Sure, but I love those suggestions that you're giving, Dr. Edmunds, especially for the younger children. Now, what about, though, let's say if we follow a student along in their learning journey. So some of those strategies I think are great for the younger students. Some of them may even work for the older students, but what might be some teaching moves that you would recommend for teachers at the middle school or high school level who are teaching students with autism? Would that change your advice that you would give them in terms of how to make those learning environments comfortable for these students?
I wouldn't change too much. What I would say is that changing classes and the noise in the hallway could be very difficult. If the child with autism at 12 or 13 goes to a regular middle school, I know myself when I'm in the middle school, 1,000 kids slamming locker doors, that could be a real challenge. So there might be a way to have the child go to the next class a little bit earlier, or follow another kid at another, go at a different time, so they're not in that, I want to call it chaos.
Correct.
It's for the rest of us, it's not chaos, but for a young person with autism, that could just be an overload. I think the other piece is also trying to gauge how much the student can tolerate. So that IEP is going to be very, very important if the child can do 10 problems, can do 20 problems, needs the break, doesn't need the break. Those are the kinds of things that I think are become a little more critical at the middle school. And then by that point, it would seem, and I can't say this for every kid, but the interest should be developed. So, when does he or she go to the library and get the books out about the trains, or about the dinosaurs, or whatever it is that's appealing to the student, and then how to branch out from that, because it's good to be an expert on trains, but you also have to learn about some other things. So, those are things to engage in. And typically in schools, at least in New Jersey, they're using ABA, applied behavioral analysis, and that's the method of either introducing and reinforcing success in the classroom.
I love that you said that. And it really, why it resonates with me is because you were saying, develop that interest in trains if that's where the student has that interest. And, that's a strategy in teaching students with autism that we should actually be replicating in our general ed classes. If one is teaching central theme and what details support the central theme, who cares if you read about butterflies and I read about, I don't know, Planet of the Apes, right? It doesn't really, I mean, yeah, it needs to be, nonfiction, and then obviously your fiction standards as well. But the actual content that they're reading or learning about sometimes doesn't matter if they are learning those other literacy skills, for example. So that's actually, again, a strategy that was developed to assist students with autism that, again, we should all be using to promote student voice, to promote, student engagement, student ownership. Given that, what would you say are actually some of the strengths or positive things about students with autism that might actually add to a classroom environment? I know you were talking a little bit about this in your TED Talk, but let's play it up.
Because they have a serious interest and a deep interest in a certain topic, they can have a wealth of information about it and stored in there, which sometimes my son, I don't know, he was singing Rock Me Like a Hurricane or something the other day. And I'm like, how do you know that song? And it's just, he knows all the 80s songs, and I just don't know how that happened. But it's just illuminates, I think, that we can share their knowledge with others, which can be a huge benefit, and depending on what the topic is, right? So I think there's something to celebrate with that, and again, it speaks to a strengths-based approach. What are the things the child with autism can do versus all the things that he may not be able to do, or she may not be able to do. I mean, they may be able to read on grade level. They might be a terrific speller, who knows, but celebrate and work from the strengths and then build on those areas where we need to focus next. My son, for example, is quite athletic. And we didn't realize that. We just said, oh, let's take him for swimming lessons. Oh my God, look at him go. So, don't allow a label to prevent exploration. Labels are okay until they generate low expectations. We need to have high expectations for every child and every adult with autism, the way we would any other child.
Off camera, you were talking with me about what your tagline is, and you told me that, when we build knowledge, we build understanding. So it's not only our knowledge of what our students with autism need, but just what we're talking about here, how do we have our students with autism lead others when there are those opportunities to do that?
And I think if we open our minds to it, we can. And here's the thing, John, that I do want to mention. Every child with autism is going to grow up to be an adult with autism, right? In the future, people will be working side by side with people with autism. I mean, this is just going to happen. They're not going to be staying home. And if they are, that's a waste. Right.
Mm-hmm.
We have all these resources in our friends and loved ones who have autism. So what's going to happen to the workforce? What's going to happen when people go to the movies or go to restaurants and all the things that we need to open our hearts and open our minds to embracing, as I say, our friends and our loved ones who have autism, because they're going to be somebody's son, somebody's daughter, somebody's grandchild, somebody's neighbor, and this is what our future is going to be.
Dr. Edmunds, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you feel our listeners should know about students with autism?
Have empathy for the parents. I know sometimes parents can be demanding, and it's hard to understand what parents are going through if you're a parent of children who are successful and are normally developing. We need to have some empathy and advocate for them so that we can make a good partnership. And I'm preaching to the choir again, I'm sure. But we want our IEP teams to truly include our parents so that they have an equal say in how children are educated. So I think advocacy for the parents is something that we didn't talk about. But I think the other thing for teachers and building leaders is to advocate for the autistic children in the building as well. They should have music class. They should go to the library. They shouldn't be in a room by themselves. I mean, there are times when I've been in certain buildings and I said, what do you mean you can't fit music in their schedule? Why are the books going on a cart up to the classroom? How come they're not coming to the library? This is their school too. So we, as I said before, we have to build knowledge, build understanding. There's no reason why children with autism can't go to the library. Are they going to be noisy? Sure they are. What parts of the library can they go to? Where will they find books they're interested in?
It's funny you mentioned having this empathy for parents when we communicate with parents, because my first episode was with Crystal Frommert, who is an expert on parent communication, or how teachers can communicate with parents. So I highly recommend that if anyone is interested in seeing that connection or that alignment between having empathy for our parents, regardless of what the issue is, and how to communicate with parents, they might want to check out that episode. Dr. Edmunds, where can folks find you?
They could find me at www.edmundsout.com, edmundsout.com. That's my website. So they can find me there. They can find me on LinkedIn at Dr. Maribeth Edmunds, and that's also, my website is also connected there. And I'm also on Twitter, which I think is now called X. And parents and school districts could connect with me there, absolutely, on social media. And I will say this, John, we shouldn't think of our children and adults with autism as a problem to be fixed. I think we talked off camera a little bit about neurodiversity. I think we need to talk about celebrating differences and taking care of one another so that we can celebrate our differences. And so let's not think of these children as a problem to be fixed.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm glad we're reconnected. We're going to stay connected, and maybe I'll get some more of our colleagues onto this podcast. Thanks again, Maribeth.
And I feel very honored that I've been invited to be here and had a chance to share my thoughts, and that you were kind enough to give me time to explain some of this. So I appreciate it, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you, John.
Oh, thank you for coming, Maribeth. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.